Hey, gang. Pastor Chad here for our second glance at the text this week. This morning in our worship, we took a look at chapter 8 of John's Gospel. And John shares Jesus' declaration, I am the light of the world. And so a little bit past that, as we talked about this morning, where God reveals himself through Jesus and he opens so that people can see. We're going to see then as he proves that physically as he heals a man who was born blind. So let's take a look at the text, which is John chapter 9. Let me read a couple of verses for you. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of God, of the works of him who sent me, while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So Jesus is heading out of town, staying just out of the reach of the leaders who still want to arrest him. And as he does it, he comes across this man. And this man has been born blind. And that poses a great conundrum for Jesus' disciples. See, their understanding between sin and suffering is that suffering is caused by sin, and there's a direct relation to it. They believed that if somebody was afflicted with something, it was because it was judgment for something that they had done. So with this man, they have a problem. If blindness is his affliction and sin was the cause of that blindness, what did he do because he was blind from birth? How could he have sinned before he was alive? So they're struggling with this idea that this man is born blind because of one of his sins, but he was always blind. So did he sin in the womb, or was it his parents' fault? You know, we see in the Old Testament the thought that sometimes sins are delivered upon the next generation. But that just seems cruel, doesn't it? That this man would be born blind because of something his parents did. So the disciples are looking at this and they're going, this, we struggle with this. We struggle with the problem of pain and suffering. Gang, we struggle with the problem of pain and suffering today. And that's what I want to take a look at. What is the relationship between sin and suffering? Now, a really important teaching for Israel is found in the book of Job. Job is inflicted with all kinds of calamity. He loses his family, he loses his stuff, he loses his fortune, and all of it is because one day Satan approaches God and he says, Job only loves you because he's doing well, because he's blessed. If you lifted your hedge of protection, I bet he'd curse you. And God says, no, he won't. And so God lifts the hedge of protection and Satan destroys him. And at one point, it's so bad for Job, he's actually sitting on top of a pile of manure, and he's got sores and boils all over him, and he's scraping them with the broken pieces of what used to be his expensive pottery. So we see Job in extreme suffering. And Job is wrestling the whole time going, I don't know what I did, God. I trust that you are all powerful. I trust that you are perfectly just. I trust that you know all things. But I'm not sure why I'm suffering. What did I do to deserve it? So classically, Job is wrestling. His friends have opinions. A stranger walks in and gives opinions. And it's not till the very end when Job confronts God and God goes, okay, if you're ready to hear the answer, Job, put your big boy pants on. He says, gird your loins. Here we go. And he looks at Job and he says, what do you know? You're a man. Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? He says, can you catch Leviathan like I can? What are the amazing things that you can do, Job? Oh, you're just a man. That's right. And you just have the understanding of a man. That's right. Well, I have the understanding of God. And I know that I do all things, as Paul would say in Romans, for the good. Even things that you can't understand, including suffering. And I do this for my glory. So in the end, Job praises God and he's restored. And Job learns the lesson that suffering, and Israel learns it through the book of Job, that suffering is not always a direct punitive result of something we've done, but that God himself can use suffering to bring about his goodwill, which sets the path for what we're learning in the New Testament. So Jesus looks at his disciples and he goes, look, the man's been born blind. So clearly it wasn't because of his sin. And it's actually not because of his parents' sin. It is so that I might be glorified. Look, suffering can have a couple of reasons. I want to share with you three. The first one is it can be corrective, meaning we are doing something wrong and God brings suffering in our life to correct our path. You think of David in Psalm 119. He writes this amazing psalm, which is meant for children as almost like a nursery rhyme. And in it, in verse 67, he says, look, before I was afflicted, before he afflicted me, I was going the wrong way. But after he afflicted me, after the Lord afflicted me, I fell in love with his word. So sometimes God uses suffering in our life to correct us and get us on the right path, to change our direction. Sometimes it's to build us. So it can be corrective. It can also be constructive. And what I mean by that is God allows suffering to come and complete us. The first chapter of James, the first part of Peter's first letter, Hebrews 12. In that particular passage, it tells us that God disciplines his sons, those whom he loves, and not discipline like you're doing wrong, I have to stop you, but discipline as in training and pushing and striving, like the coach who makes his team run laps so they get in better shape. God allows suffering to come into our lives sometimes to construct us, to build us up. You just think in that suffering that often we learn how to trust and how to lean into God deeper when we realize that we can't do things on our own. So suffering can be corrective. It can be constructive. And what the lesson here in John is, sometimes it's just so God can be glorified. So was this man born blind and lived this whole life just so Jesus could be glorified? Yes and no. God allowed the brokenness of the sin of this world, that man would be born blind, knowing that at the perfect time, Jesus would come and restore his sight. And the first thing that the man would see is the Son of God face to face. And because of this, then, that Jesus would be glorified. But that's not a new statement. We've already talked about Job, that God allowed Job to go through all these things so that he might be glorified. Job loses his family. He loses his fortune so God can be glorified. Lazarus, in just a couple of chapters, and what Pastor Brian's going to preach on next week, Lazarus is going to lose his life so that God can be glorified. We even think of Jesus himself. God himself allows his son to die so that Jesus might be glorified. Sometimes the brokenness in this world is just so that God can display his restorative, almighty power. So gang, when you see suffering, our job is not to try to figure out exactly why it's happening. Sometimes it's constructive, sometimes it's corrective, and sometimes it's just so God can show his glory. But in this suffering, what we are called to do is to lean into God and to trust in him, even if it makes no sense to us. To know that the God who takes death and makes life can take any suffering in our life and can use it to make us look more like him. It's painful, it sucks, it hurts, I'm not gonna lie to you. But if God is using this suffering to shape us and to mold us and conform us into his image, then it's a good thing. And it's how the Apostle Paul can say, rejoice. Again, I say rejoice in all things. It's how James can say rejoice and find happiness in your trials. Because even though the pain is there, it's the kind of pain which God uses to make us look more like him.